goodness. I'd like to talk about free energy and the mirror universe, but the mirror universe plays into free energy, and free energy plays into the mirror universe. Just to take a quick dip, very quick, into ancient history. And actually, I never have dreams, honestly. Almost never have dreams. And yet I've had this same recurring dream to talk about the mirror universe. Interestingly enough. By the way, Nikola Tesla said that the velocity of any disturbance, whether that be the air, which we call sound, or the ether, depends on a certain ratio between elasticity and density. Same is true of creating waves in the water. I don't know if you've ever smacked your hand really fast on in a placid piece of water. It'll just end up hurting your hand, and you really won't create a disturbance. So there is this co-eternal conjugate relationship. Eric Dollard actually talks about this quite a lot. And he talks about, and this is accurate because you can actually measure it with a coil, that the electrical charge in the case of alternating current lines is not actually in the wires, rather it's between the two. There's been an observation now for well over 100 years that if you actually have spikes in amperage, which is relational to magnetism, the actual AC current wires will spread apart. But if you have a lightning strike, and this has been observed many, countless thousands of times, like a lightning strike on the AC lines running down your backyard or anywhere else at the street level, that the spike in voltage, which is equal to dielectricity, the wires will actually swing together. So amperage will swing apart, which is true force. And by the way, anybody that's taken electrical theory or is an electrician will tell you it's not voltage that will plant you 6 feet under. It's amperage. There's a question I posed to people before. It's like, which is more dangerous? 5 million volts at a half an amp, or 1 volt at 10 amps. 1 volt at 10 amps is way more wicked as far as which will stop your ticker quicker. By the way, as a side note, I've been talking about bowdlerization for years. There's a warning on Daily Mail, which is as evil and unreliable as the BBC is, and they're warning all the young people that are switching to real butter. They gave a warning, that their lives are in peril because these people aren't eating margarine anymore. Of course, margarine is like, what, 1 molecule away from plastic. You can actually set your watch by what an evil entity will say. Like if they say it's bad for you, you know it's good for you, and vice versa. They're basically saying everybody that's eating natural, because there's a gazillion Amish people that live well into their 90s, late 90s, that eat butter for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But they're saying all these young people are in peril because they're eating a real product instead of basically modified plastic. I saw that yesterday on the Daily Mail. I just had to mention that because it's incredibly funny, and of course it's utterly upside down. Anyway, getting back to the mirror universe. Like I said, I almost never dream, but I've had a couple of dreams recently about the mirror universe, and I was deep into the THEURGY, which is where you extract your true self out from your holographic or mirror self. It goes by a bunch of different names: apophatism, THEURGY, via negativa, neti, mineme, sati, smriti, jhana. There's a laundry list of names, and they all refer to one and the same thing: the subjective extraction from this holographic or mirror self. And this, of course, is where every ancient version of metaphysics speaks about two selves, the transcendent self and the worldly self. If everything in nature rings true and the center holds, it doesn't matter if you're talking about physics or metaphysics or field theory or theurgy. Everything is pointing towards the center. And what this means is that the very conjugate nature of the universe, from the perspective of any vector, if it is accurate and simple, which would follow Occam's razor, that it must be the same. So we have the same thing in field theory, and this is where we actually tie in metaphysics and free energy and holographic universe, and that's really kind of a misnomer. It's perfect multiplicative representation of one and the same thing, which is no different than saying the Fibonacci sequence. Everything that we see is beautiful in nature is a multiplicative of the one. Of course, right here in the center, I know you can't see it, there's a little hole right at the center, and everything would be 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, etc., etc., etc. They're all multiplicatives or mirrors of the one, the first two digits of the Fibonacci sequence, or 1 and 1. It's not a second one or a separate one. You could say it's a mirror one, but fundamentally, and this is the basis of all monistic metaphysics, both Greek, Indian, and Egyptian, it's the mirror image of the very thing itself that is the transcendent and unseen. It's the subjective. And this, trust me, this all does tie into free energy. And I spend way more time thinking about free energy than, a lot. Anyway, this is a genius guy. I wish he was still alive. His name is Dr. Ole Dija He had 2 PhDs. If you're worried about that kind of stuff, which I'm not, this book is out there. You can either get it on Amazon, but it's also out there where you could get it. Wink, wink. Thanks to me. You're welcome. And he actually rejected, however, he was still in academia. He had to say it very lightly. He was completely against relativity. And he understood the misnomers of relativity against that of gravity. I mean, I figured out magnetism, and I figured out gravity, and I always love it when I talk about gravity. Someone say, well, gravity doesn't exist, it's just density. You know, to my answer, which of course necessitatively is, well, density of what? That's like people that talk about waves. Academicians love talking about energy waves. They've never defined energy, and they won't tell you a wave of what. Gravity is not a thing of itself, and of course you can see gravity under presumed magnetic attraction, which is not magnetism at all, it's dielectric acceleration. We can make correct observations and yet incorrect conclusions. If we have a two-mass problem that are accelerating towards one another, the observation is correct that they are accelerating towards one another, but in explanation they're not. They're actually accelerating towards a null pressure zone between both. And this can only occur due to the ether. And I keep saying this, and I don't know if people get it, and it's profoundly important. And if you don't remember anything in this video, you should remember this. There's only ever been 2 postulates for this universe. One's been based in rational, logical ether, and the other one's been based in space-time. Time is only measured. Time doesn't exist at all. Space is the mirror image of pure potential. The mirror image of pure potential is pure impotency. Pure impotency. This is a reason why Nikola Tesla called Einstein a fuzzy-haired crackpot, because relativity rejects the ether, and it reifies space as a thing. We grew up with space-time curvature nonsense. Nikola Tesla said that this is absolutely ludicrous. You know, you can find countless quotes about it. He rails against relativity. I'd like to very quickly make a couple intelligent. This is a really great book. Some of the equations in here are so complex. They're beyond me. Even some of the complex ones take a great deal of thinking about. Of course, it's not about math. I want to talk about the mirror universe and free energy and get to it quickly here. It's never about math. You know, it's seeing nature on nature's own grounds and understanding how things work. And everything in this universe is a mirror universe. I don't know if you're familiar with the ancient Egyptian artifact, the Ankh. They actually have artifacts. They're mirrors. And we see, of course, in hieroglyphic carvings. An Ankh, by the way, is a uterus. You can try to protest me all you want. I spent endless thousands of hours looking at ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. I have some sort of prodigy level of understanding on ancient dead languages, as probably is well witnessed to. But, of course, the jet actually sits at the cross barrier in the Ankh hieroglyph. But they actually made Ankhs that were handheld mirrors. And in the top loop, which is a representation of the uterus, what you're doing is you're looking, and this is where objects that are useful for everyday purposes, in the case of a hand mirror, is also, too, if it's representational on every level, metaphysics, physics, usefulness. When you're actually looking in the mirror, you actually think about your mirror self. You're actually looking at yourself before you were born. The mirror self or true self. So it's kind of brilliant that the Ankh is a mirror that we look into for, women used for putting on makeup back in the ancient days. But it is a uterus. The two selves, the dielectric and the magnetic, because magnetism is the dielectric field. This idea that a battery has a negative charge, Walter Russell brilliantly and intelligently railed against the idea of a negative charge. There's no such thing as a negative charge. I mean, that's like if you look out on a desert and say, well, we've got negative water out here. It's like, no, it's dry. There is no water. Yeah, it's negative water. Here's a simple battery. There's a charge and a discharge. And of course, we were talking last night in live stream about the idea of dimensionality. Once again, the hairy armpit chick that is Mother Nature doesn't deal in dimensionality. There's only one dimension ultimately. There's dimensionality and anti-dimensionality. Just as gravity is an anti-spatial vector, as we know very well that gravity in Mother Nature abhors a vacuum. Length, width, and depth are different, not different dimensions. They are different vectors of dimensionality. You can't say, well, this is a three-dimensional book. It's like, no, this is a dimensional book made up of atoms and mass and magnitude. Length, width, and depth of this book are not different dimensions. They're not. It's dimensionality. Academicians and people that think deeply but not clearly, as Nikola Tesla talks about them, they convolute and they complicate our universe unnecessarily because it can't work that way. It breaks Occam's razor. Fundamentally, we have to have a different sort of zeitgeist in thinking about free energy. We actually have to define energy and understand what energy is. And I know I'm flapping my lips in this, but I've built a lot of stuff. I don't just sit here and make videos, even though you think I do. I got like a mad scientist workstation in the back room and in the basement. I'm always building and creating things, so I don't just make videos. My hands ache from actually doing too much labor via hands, honestly. I show that in leather work, but obviously that's not a lot I do. I'd like to read to you about gravity here, and we'll get very quickly into free energy. Talking about argumentation regarding gravity, and there's a famous one in explaining gravity. This is called Gravitational Electromagnetic Analogy by Oliver Heaviside, but this commentary is by the 2 PhD, Dr. Oli Djefamenko, who wrote this book and several others. Arguments against the presence of gravitational energy. He said the two strongest possible arguments for excluding the idea of gravitational energy are that predictions in general relativity obtained with the aid of Einstein's field equations without gravitational energy as a source of gravitation have been found to agree with observations, and the equivalence principle forbids gravitational energy to be a source of gravitation. But there's no evidence whatsoever of gravitational energy because gravity is not a field, it's an anti-field. It's always an anti-spatial vector. And this has to do with the elasticity and density of the ether. Two objects or more are never, ever accelerating towards one another. They're accelerating towards the lowest no pressure point between all of them. And that has nothing to do with curved space-time. That has to do with elasticity of the ether. It's an undeniable fact that they're never accelerating towards one another. What are they accelerating towards? Well, this hole in space, the erasure of space. Nature abhors a vacuum. Since apparently no special energy in space defined, because space has no energy. Nikola Tesla referred to space literally as nothing, and it is accurate. It's the negative image or the mirror image of pure potential, i.e. the ether. Frame of reference, no energy should be present by the actual math. No energy can be present in the space that would, quote-unquote, contain gravitational field or energy. This is called non-localizability or gravitational energy by other descriptions. This equivalence principle demands that a certain energy density would appear in the space defined by the equivalent reference frame. In other words, in the space between two objects, two or more objects. But there isn't any. None's ever been observed or recorded, and you can't say it's curved space-time. the assumed curvature, and of course the objects also too, the vortex path they take in two objects that accelerate towards one another are never straight on, head-on vectors. They're always, they do this number like they're circling around a drain, a vortex drain, which is exactly correct. And this alone, along with a million other examples, of course, posits the ether. This guy has 2 PhDs. He wrote a book on electricity and electrical theory. He was quite a genius. He was a Ukrainian professor. Anyway, seeing neither Maxwell's equations nor the solutions indicate existence or causal links between electrical magnetic fields. Therefore, we must conclude that an electromagnetic field is a dual entity. Now we're talking about a mirror entity here. And of course, electricity is not a thing itself either. There's no such thing as electricity. Sure there is. How dare you say something so heretical? Well, I didn't say that. Charles Proteus Steinmetz, the god of field theory, said that an electrical discharges waves and impulses. He said at his time in the printing of the book, 1917, over 100 years ago, that they had convoluted what electricity was. It was the consubstantiality between two entities, dielectricity and magnetism, which made up the, quote, electrical field. In other words, electricity is a hybrid, kind of like a cake is a hybrid of eggs and flour and other things. Electricity is a hybrid of dielectricity and magnetism, to keep it really simple. According to these equations, I got the equation here. It's going to take me forever to read it. I don't want to waste time doing that. You can find this in the book, which you could download for free, by the way. You're very welcome. According to these equations, in time-variable systems, electrical magnetic fields are always created simultaneously because they have a common causative source, the changing electrical current. The loss of energy inertia manifests as a dielectric. And getting into free energy here, I still want to go on a little bit about the mirror universe. Imagine, for you, if you will, to create a simple analogy, a candle surrounded by mirrors. The whole, of course, you can't really surround it completely by mirrors. And of course, there is a certain capacitance ability, like the highest reflectivity used in mega-million-dollar telescopes is 91% reflectance. This is the maximum reflectance of shiny aluminum. In other words, if you make it as shiny as humanly possible, God levels of shininess, you can only, I think it's like 91% reflectance you can get. This, of course, is called the ground of the energy. Everything, of course, is grounded, just as there are no straight lines in the universe. Everything is curvilinear. So you use all the mirrors around a candle in analogy so that people could wrap their brains around it easier. What's the maximum capacitance versus elasticity and density of the medium that you'd actually get out of it? Ultimately, as I've said a million times, no AC generator actually creates electricity. What it is doing is churning up the ether. Electricity is the mirage. Of course, it's the conjugate of dielectricity and magnetism. Just as I was talking about the negative charge, the idea of a negative, the positive terminal and the negative terminal. There's no such thing as negative charge. That would be a discharge node. The drain is like not negative water. Well, like the shower head. There's a near perfect analogy. The shower head is the positive charge. That's positive water up there. And the water going down the drain is negative charge. Well, that's stupid. It's the exact same water, except it's going down the drain. So that would be the discharge node, the node of charge that passes through a system, a circuit, of course, to drive something, to do something. In case of the shower is to get yourself clean. You wouldn't say the drain is negative water. It's the discharge or the ground. To say sink or to say vortex is no different than saying counter space or to say drain. I want to keep things as simple as possible because everything in the universe is that simple, and yet people don't think that simply. We think the universe is complex, but it's not. There are ratios and harmonics in nature, but there is no math in nature. You could actually completely leave out the math. We don't need the math to understand nature. And I don't confuse math with arithmetic. You should look up the difference between math and arithmetic vis-a-vis the Pythagoreans and the Platonists, and also, too, specifically Aristotle. Anyway, getting on to free energy, about ether excitation, which of course is what it's about. We have time variable charges which cause a disturbance in the ether, but there is a threshold, a ratio of elasticity of the ether, at which time Energy is made manifest, and energy made manifest is not energy in its true sense, but energy in disturbance, energy in modulation. And all electricity has a frequency. And a frequency is just a fancy way of saying a disturbance. What you're doing is, of course, you're churning up the rest. But you're churning up the rest with rest that is not at rest. Perfect example. The rest that is not at rest would be the magnetic field. All fields are ether perturbation modalities. So the question is, like, how do you disturb one chicken to do something, like lay an egg, by using another chicken that's angry? So you got two chickens. How do I get this chicken over here that's like half asleep sitting on its eggs, representation of the ether, to lay an egg or to get excited, or also to get upset by taking this chicken over here that's all worked up because I fed it chili peppers? Maybe you like take the chicken that's hopped up on chili peppers and throw it at the chicken that's sleeping on its egg nest. And then you get this chain reaction effect. Well, the question is then, that's a pretty good analogy. I like that analogy. I came up with that on the fly. You're welcome. Then the question becomes is, well, what's the field geometry of that? I've given that a great deal of thought. Magnetism is the modulation of the dielectric. Well, why is it modulated at all? Principle and attribute. That's like asking about light and illumination. True light is energy at rest, no different than a battery at rest. I took this, either one of these little 2032 batteries, up to super low power LEDs, hook it to the positive and the negative. This, of course, is the mirror universe once again. We have a circuit completed, and we're actually generating light. Well, what's the distinction? Well, the light at rest would be the analogy of the battery with no energy tapped off of it. The illumination, of course, is the frequency. There's no such thing as light as any human ideates it that doesn't have a frequency, i.e. a wavelength. This frequency or wavelength, of course, it is a disturbance. But the disturbance must penetrate a barrier, and that barrier is the barrier of elasticity of the ether itself. Without the correct geometry, we can't disturb the ether. And the way we would disturb the ether, in my analogy of the chicken at rest versus the hopped up chicken on bell peppers, is you, you have to know the specific angle, like, for example, to throw the active chicken at the sleeping chicken, and then you end up agitating the whole coop. See, hey, now I got power generation here. So what's that field geometry to manifest the power? AC generators don't generate anything. There is a time variable magnetic field relative to a dielectric reflector, and this dielectric reflector is a fancy way of saying a copper winding. I don't care if it's two-phase or three-phase. The person, by the way, that perfected Nikola Tesla's so-called AC generator was Charles Proteus Steinmetz. He understood all the minutiae of transient currents and efficient power generation. It's never about the math. The energy, of course, is the root of the modulation. The electric is the root of the ether under modulation. All power manifestation, which is not power by true definition, which would be the ether. Electricity is not power, it's the dissipation of power. It's the disturbance. All electricity has a frequency. This is what confounded all these academicians, and it still does 100% about gravity. Gravity is not a field, it's an anti-field. Electricity is not a thing at all. Gravity is a consubstantiality, electricity is a consubstantiality between magnetism and dielectricity, which has a frequency. So how do we manifest nihil ex nihilo? From nothing comes nothing. How do we excite from rest the energy that everybody wants and desires? Everybody wants it. Everybody wants free energy. I know that. Do I look like I'm dumb? Even the people that can't stand me know I'm not dumb. How do we get it? There's no transference of power between kinetic input in the case of wind or hydroelectric into the generation of electricity. What that does is it introduces a time variable into a rotating magnetic field with a specific arch form, because that's all an AC generator is. It's an arch form. And as I've said a million times, every AC generator in simplex is an inside-out magnet. The magnetism's on the inside and the dielectric reflector is on the outside. brilliant way, in arch form. What would be power generation in simplex arch form? Well, you'd have to have a kinetic input. You'd actually put the magnetic field on the inside, the dielectric reflector on the outside, and introduce time-variable magnetic fields in relationship to the dielectric reflector for the manifestation of power. And that's what we call an AC generator. Then the question becomes, what is the field geometry arch form for manifesting so-called free energy? Well, I think I have the answer. I've thought about it endlessly. I've tried to refute myself endlessly. There is a time variable already in the magnetic field. It's called gyromagnetic precession. Go look up L'Amour frequency. This whole universe is a mirror universe. As Victor Schauberger figured out, the answer to all of nature's problems, all of them, are also too found in nature. And that's not my opinion. That's a hardcore fact. Victor Schauberger approached it from that perspective. He solved a lot of mysteries to simplifying things and solving problems by looking at nature itself. And humanity doesn't do that. 99.9% of it doesn't do that anyway. I figured out magnetism. I figured out gravity. I don't think I figured it out. I know I figured it out. It's not about the math. It's not about the equations. It's understanding how things work. Some of the most brilliant inventions ever made were made by illiterate people that never went to school. I'm not one of those. I spent many years in college. Not that it did anything for me. But it's about looking at things the way they are in and of themselves. It's not about the degree. It's not about the math. It's about understanding how things work. It's brutally cold outside. Right now it's supposed to go down to like 2 degrees tonight. My buddy, you contact him too on his website. It's named Tim Vanderelli. He invented the ferrocell. He invented something else too very recently. A very brilliant person. Look him up, Tim Vanderelli. There's like all sorts of implantable devices in the human body, like pacemakers and this and that, and they run on batteries. And when the battery runs out, they're going to cut you open and they're going to change out the battery. Well, he invented this neat thing from your diaphragm where you breathe in and breathe out. You know, it's moving all the time regardless. If you're alive, it's moving anyway. Well, he invented this device that generates power, and it just runs a thin little line to whatever implantable body device that you have, and it recharges the battery so they don't have to zip you back open again, which is, needless to say, painful and invasive, to replace the battery. Like, for an example, your pacemaker. Brilliant. How come some doctor didn't figure that out? He's not a doctor. He figured it out. This is what brilliant minds do. He's a great inventor. He actually comes into live streams quite often. He's invented many things, one of which is so amazing that the patent lawyer wouldn't give him a patent for it until he went home and got the device and showed it to him, because the device is so fantastical, like Star Trek level fantastical. That can't exist. There's no way a device like this exists. Oh, it does. You ever want to reach him, you could find him on his website, ferrocell.us. I'm not, trying to roll out or promote his website, but if you ever want to contact him or like get a ferrocell or buy the components to... This is not a promotion or anything. I don't get any kickbacks or nothing. He's a great guy. And thank you so much for watching. If you ever like these videos, any donations, always warmly welcome. You can contact me or donation in the description below every video. Have a lovely week. Nice talking to you. Lux Veritas.